Once again, at the crossroads where the forbidden subjects of religion and politics intersect. This is the Sophie Scholl Roundtable, and we continue with the discussion where we had last time on voter fraud, the old-fashioned voting machines, which seemed to be much better at preventing the fiasco we've been watching in this post-election season. But going back to what we've been witnessing, what we've been observing and seeing in this post-election time, what do you think of these fraud allegations? Evidence. Some saying there's no evidence of widespread fraud. Does Trump really have a case? Anybody want to comment?
I think he would have a case, but I think, as I've been saying for a while, that the two parties have just sort of joined forces in the whole continuation of the progressive movement. And I don't think, the majority of Republicans that are involved with election law are in the stream of the Republican Party that Trump represents, in terms of like the outsiders that are willing to buck that progressive system. And I just think he's getting shut down at every turn, because the election is run by the establishment on both sides.
On both sides.
Well, yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, as I pointed out last time, so much of the activities and so many of the opportunities that formerly would have been called fraud or provided opportunities or suspicion for fraud have been rendered legitimate, defined so, or have been deliberately set up so that you cannot establish evidence and cannot document the evidence. It's the system is set up to encourage and conceal and protect it.
Well,
we can't know.
We have judges who are very reluctant to overturn elections. Period. If there's an election that's had and it gets thrown into the judicial process, they don't want to overturn it.
And I wonder how many of those judges have received letters saying, remember what happened to the family of Judge Kavanaugh. I don't put it past.
Anything is possible.
No. I mean, they're Linskyites, mafia methods. They admired the mafia.
And this all started, as far as I can tell, way early, when we knew that there was going to be these states changing their election law in terms of how they run the absentee ballot system, and expanding that aggressively. And where were the state representatives in those states that could have stood up and said, no, this is, the four of us could see it coming, and it was a disaster waiting to happen as soon as it started expanding mail-in ballots and absentee requirements. And this is just, the chickens came home to roost when the election actually happened.
Lots of luck with that if you're a Republican in New York State in the legislature.
Right, but New York's just one state. I think this expansion happened, and I can't point to specific states, but I think it happened even in some of the red states where, their state legislative bodies had a good amount of Republicans that probably could have stopped the expansion of it.
Yeah.
Like I said, I don't have specific examples, but we sort of saw this coming.
COVID happens, and everybody's got to do something. It's an election year. It's kind of the same dog and pony show we tend to get. We got to do something.
Mm-hmm.
So what I don't understand is how the Department of Justice in D.C. did not just cut through the grime and just say, the standards are going to be simple and basic and it's going to apply to everybody. That's what I don't get.
Well, the states have the right to set the rules and methods of election.
But when we have a pandemic unfolding, we've got to do this, and this to accommodate people who don't want to show up at a polling place. I mean, as Garrett said, it was a catastrophe that was easily predictable and waiting to happen. And it has.
COVID was used as the,
Cover.
right,
Yeah.
right. Oh, it's COVID. And Republican state representatives probably didn't want to seem unsensitive to
Yep.
the pandemic, so they're like, okay, we'll expand the qualifications for absentee or mail-in ballots.
Yep.
I'm afraid I'm a socially unacceptable cynic. I grant absolutely zero legitimacy to the moral pretensions of liberals. Now, there are bleeding hearts, not in power, but there are bleeding hearts out there that sincerely believe that people should have every opportunity. The most ignorant and perverse and every kind of problem person, mentally deficient, whatever, that somebody that's never heard of the candidates, they should be able to vote, and their vote should count just as much as those of us who research the policies and the planks and the platforms and all that. They're not. Those people are not in power. The people who make the decisions. I'm totally cynical about their motivation.
Yeah, and I like what Mark Levin has to say. I don't want to make it easy to vote. I just want to make it possible to vote. And I think we just unloosed every kind of voter ID requirement that I feel like got trashed in this last election, especially regarding these mail-in ballots.
Well, Mel, I think I have some historical perspective on that. I've been studying Greek and Roman history, even a little more of late. Democracy is a terrible idea. It worked very, very badly in Greece. The Romans came up with a republic that worked much better. It had lasted 400 years. These are all that our founding fathers had to go by. So they set up a government, a republican government. It was experimental. They granted the vote to the property-owning white males. They said, these are the people that have the most skin in the game, they're the best educated, motivated. Let's see if it'll even work with them. Then we can expand it, and the states can do that one by one. The states have complete control. Experiment and see how far you can go. Well, it worked. It worked okay to get the people who didn't own property. It worked okay to get all the race. It worked okay to get the women. Doesn't mean it's going to work okay to get absolutely everybody. At some point, you get that situation where they discover, well, all we have to do is vote ourselves money from the public till and not worry about anything else. Then it's not going to work.
I'm glad Norm made that point because I'm going to piggyback off it. I just did a little research here in advance of this. I didn't do a deep dive into, but what I wanted to get a snapshot of was voter turnouts in the 50 states this election. And the data says that the national turnout averaged 66.7%. We have, according to data that a variety of websites are using, somewhere between 17 and 20 states that had 70+% voter turnout, including one state, Minnesota, that had 80%. I find that unbelievable.
Yeah.
I find that thoroughly unbelievable.
Right.
And it's one thing to suggest that, okay, we vote, count all the votes. It's another thing, very different thing, when you have voter turnouts that would seem to be absolute, not just outliers, but raise red flags.
Yeah.
And here's the rub. Some of the states that had 70% voter turnout, some of these were the battlegrounds. Florida, North Carolina, PA, Iowa, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota. And Ohio was in the upper 60s. Okay, the national turnout 66.7. Okay, so maybe that's not too off. But I find it absolutely ridiculous and implausible that we have nearly half the states have 70+% voter turnout. I don't get it, and I don't believe it.
Well, that can be subject to a great deal of statistical examination. Surely somebody has done that.
You would think so.
See how it correlates with which way the vote went. See how it correlates with their turnout in past years. See how it correlates with see how the presidential vote correlates with the vote for Senate. There's all kinds of ways that statisticians can work that over to search out places where you smell a rat.
Yeah.
Yeah, I smell a rat when I notice in these battleground cities, that is Philadelphia, Atlanta, Detroit, Las Vegas,
Milwaukee.
Yeah, Milwaukee, an exceptionally large turnout for Biden, whereas in these other major cities, it was less than average. To me, something smells like a rat.
Particularly when you see, or when you think back to the turnout for the rallies and the campaign events.
Yeah, I know. It just baffles me to see Joe Biden get more votes than Barack Obama.
Yeah, I find that really ridiculous as well. It doesn't make sense.
And some of these statisticians that really focus on doing these analyses with polls or with elections.
Well, of course, the mail-in votes would result in a much larger vote tally.
Right, that's what I think.
But
The question would be then.
should be balanced.
Well, and to piggyback off that, the question would then be, were some of those votes actually cast? Or did someone cast a group of ballots for some people?
Well, sure, that's the question.
Oh, they had a case, or a suspected case of ballot harvesting in Warren County leading up to the election.
Wow.
There was reports from people in the Warren neighborhood of a man coming to their house asking for their ballot, saying, you hand this over to me and I'll make sure it gets cast. And I know from running for elected office, you can foil the voter rolls from the county in Chautauqua, and I'm sure it's the same in Pennsylvania, and that gives you the person's name, address, and their age, which is the kicker. Yeah. And I'll bet you that person wasn't going around to 30 to 40-year-old people's house. I bet they were targeting that upper age group, and maybe even a certain demographic besides age. And I'm just saying, if you can find it right next door to us, I'm sure that's good evidence that it's probably happening somewhere else.
Foil nothing. That's public information.
Right.
Anybody can get it. I have it.
Yeah.
And when I think, too, of fraud, I noticed an article here by Patrick Bosham. I think Limbaugh even quoted it. Talk about missing votes. Delaware County, Pennsylvania, 50,000 votes held on 47 USB cards are missing. You can't track it down. Or another stat here. Matt Brainerd's Voter Integrity Project estimates that 20,000 people who no longer met residency requirements cast ballots in Georgia. I mean, these kinds of things kept creeping up.
I was going to mention Matt Brainerd because I saw the video he produced on the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, and he went through a series of things that happen in any election. You have people that move, you have people that request absentee ballots, and what he did is he basically set up a phone bank with teams of people calling people. And of course, when you have a cold call, sometimes someone is willing to answer questions, and many times are not. Mm-hmm. But people that did answer questions, he was able to draw some conclusions based on the data that he was gathering. And in that video on November 24th, he said, and Matt Brainerd is a data guy. He's a statistician, okay? And so he did a deep dive into this stuff. He looked at 6 states. Georgia, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, Nevada, or Pennsylvania was the other one. And he's looking at all these states and all of these consistent categories. He said this, and it's stunning, absolutely stunning. He said, based on what I'm saying, in Wisconsin, Georgia, and Arizona, the question of who deservedly won is in question. And if you look at those three states, there's 37 electoral votes there. You do the math. 306 minus 37, what does that get you?
269.
Yep, 269 to 269, and you have a House of Representatives deciding an election.
Well, you know, the world is a lot more complex and a lot more filled with nasty business than people want to realize. In our conservative party, Mel, where I was many years, there was a man who was always trying to take control. And over 20 years, the things that I know that were done and suspect that were done, this was a man who my brother-in-law observed stealing a log chain from a pastor. If that kind of a man works, and he achieved control of the local conservative party, what kind of people are probably in charge of the Democratic Party?
Oh, that gets into a really deep philosophical question, Norm. Like, what sort of people desire to have control over other people?
Exactly my point.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly my point.
Yeah.
Wow.
And we've created a lot of avenues for that type of person to try to get there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
They think they're entitled to the levers of government.
Yeah.
Which are many now.
Yeah.
Yes.
Here's the thing that I've been thinking a lot about. The Equal Protection Clause, because that was used in Bush-Gore.
Yeah.
My vote was not equally protected. Now, if you voted for Biden, you got Equal Protection Plus. That is.
Well, especially when they kick out certain observers of the counting process, they're allowed to be there.
Yep.
That's part of the process. It's called accountability. Mm-hmm. It's making sure that one party isn't getting some advantage over another. And when you tell people, oh, you got to stay on that side of the room, or you just kick them out of the room altogether, you start throwing all kinds of questions into the scenario. And you don't need Rudy Giuliani or Sidney Powell's Kraken or Hammer and Scorecard to believe that.
Or I've heard allegations on the radio that in Biden trending areas, Philadelphia and so on, voters received calls, hey, there's something wrong with your ballot. Do you want to come in and fix it? Your signature wasn't on the envelope and so on and so on. And people like in Warren County and Elk County didn't get these calls. Well, how are you going to prove that? Well, why isn't anyone interested in any investigation? The press, with all of its potential and facilities and mechanisms, why aren't they investigating this? Do they know this didn't happen? Or they think that it's fine if it did? Is that legitimate? Are they considering it legitimate? You know, why? There's so many of these things, and it's inherent in the mail-in system.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Why did those FBI agents descend en masse to Stone, what's that guy's first name? Roger Stone's place, and yet they seem to be so obscure regarding this election. Yeah. So anyway, we I think covered the bases pretty good here on election fraud, what we see, observe in post-election, and makes us think back. Can't we go back to the way it was done in the past, where we didn't see this kind of post-election chaos? Let's go back to those voting machines, as Norm talked about, which were made in Jamestown.
For the whole world. There was one other small company in New Jersey. didn't sell very many.
Which kind of tells you that said something about the product made here in Jamestown.
They were all over the world, and they were required in New York State and
let's,
many others.
And let's bring out those blueprints and get them reconstructed
I'm sure
again.
they could get an IDA pilot too.
All right, well, thanks for joining us here on the Sophie Scholl Roundtable. See you next time.